This operation by Lukashenko regime is very cynical, as it uses most vulnerable people, women and children. To defend itself against this hybrid attack, Latvia has temporarily introduced an emergency situation in 4 local municipalities bordering Belarus. However, all measures and decisions taken in the course of the situation are duly considered in the light of our international obligations. Latvia ensures individualized approach, and those who are in real need of assistance receive it on humanitarian grounds. Persons seeking a lawful entry into the territory of Latvia are not prevented from crossing the area to which the emergency measures apply and submit their asylum applications if necessary. At the same time, we call on Belarus to assume its full responsibility for the people whose arrival to its territory it is organizing. Belarus must fulfill its legal obligations stemming from international treaties it has joined. Belarus is a state party to a number of UN conventions, including the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, and it is bound by the obligations to lay down their aim. Therefore, we have requested the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to be more active and to stop these actions of Belarus. Our answer to this challenge should be a united EU, both in actions and messaging, that this will not go through and the external borders will be protected. And let me mention also a few suggestions for EU's further actions. First of all, the EU, together with like-minded countries, must keep building up pressure on Lukashenko's regime with additional sanctions. We suggest sanctioning the persons and entities who are engaged in this operation. Close coordination between the EU and the US is important. Joint action will have a greater effect. Secondly, it is crucial that the EU develops a toolbox which would enable it to respond to all diversity of hybrid threats and to build resilience against them. Thirdly, the EU member states and institutions shall continue to reach out to third countries whose citizens are unwillingly dragged into this operation. Their cooperation with us is of crucial importance. And finally, the EU should not give in to Lukashenko's pressure to stop our support to Belarusian civil society. Quite the opposite. Our efforts to support Belarusian civil society and independent media should be doubled. In parallel, the EU should continue to demand Lukashenko to stop violence, to release political prisoners, and to organize free and fair presidential elections as soon as possible. Dear colleagues, I thank you for your attention.
Madam Parliamentary Secretary, thank you very much for your statement. I now move on to the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, Mr. Mantas Adomėnas. Please.
Thank you, Honourable Chairman and Honourable Members of Parliament. A lot of material has been put forward already by my distinguished colleague from Latvia, so there is no need to repeat those points. But to put things in context, the dictator in Minsk has for over a year been fighting to maintain his position of power and to cling to his illegitimately and criminally sort of gained position, and he's now trying to attempt all sorts of actions in order to consolidate his position and to stop the EU member states which are most outspoken in criticism and in putting forward the sanctions, to stop supporting Belarusian civil society. So we have to view this hybrid attack in the context of other actions, namely over 650 political prisoners to date, and that number probably would be much greater if we applied more adequate criteria for assessment the statement of political prisoners. But this chamber definitely well knows the situation. There are more than 4,500 political criminal cases against protesters, and more than 35,000 Belarusians were detained at some point for protesting against the regime. So dictator's response has been sort of to seek and destabilize the neighboring EU states and to put pressure generally on the EU. One first such act was the hijacking and forced landing of Ryanair flight, and then that's sort of taken into the context shows that we're dealing with the hotbed of destabilization in the center of Europe and at our borders, and it wouldn't be too far-fetched to call the Minsk regime at the moment a rogue state which is seeking new and novel ways to put political pressure and spread destabilization to its neighbor states. And Lithuania was the first to bear the brunt of this hybrid attack using irregular migrants, which started in huge numbers, in significant numbers in Lithuania in May 2021, and later propagated onto Poland and Latvia. And it would be adequate to call this weaponizing irregular migration with a view of exerting political pressure on the EU. Moreover, as has been noted by my distinguished colleague from Riga, this is accompanied by a vast propaganda campaign about inhumane treatment of irregular migrants. Quite a few of the instances seem to be fabricated by Belarusian border guard service themselves, and with the view of inciting violence among irregular migrants in provoking retaliation for alleged inhumane treatment of the migrants. This bears increasingly ominous overtones in the view of the Zapad military exercises, whose most active stage is about to begin next to the EU borders in Belarus and Russia. So far, we do not witness any readiness to de-escalate from the other side of the border, and we have growing body of evidence of direct involvement of Belarusian state, its agencies, its enterprises in the organization of the flow and in the active pushing of the migrants across the border, and refusing to readmit them despite their having documents allowing them to enter Belarusian territory, such as visa and passports. When they change their minds, they are not readmitted back into the territory. So no need to go through the material that my colleague has expounded in detail, but the important thing is this cannot be left without a strong and swift EU response, as Lukashenko will continue to blatantly disregard the international commitments and continue to use not only hybrid schemes against the EU, but will also definitely try to come up with new schemes, new methods of destabilization, and new kinds of hybrid attacks. So while we're grateful for the EU solidarity and assistance, we have to move beyond the current level of response to a much more proactive stance insofar as the credibility of the European Union is at stake here. During the Gimnik discussion, my minister expects a real debate and clear political agreement and guidance for the EU institutions for further sanctions and Lukashenko's regime, targeted especially to Belarusian state entities and persons involved in the smuggling of migrants across the eastern EU borders and for abuse of human rights. In particular, we propose to amend the criteria of 2006 Belarusian sanctions regime, adding incitement and organization of illegal migration flows as the grounds for being included into sanctions. And it's not otiose to say that Other dictatorial regimes are closely watching what kind of response from EU will come, and if there is no forceful response, this will be seen as an encouragement to use migration flows as well as other sort of related hybrid measures to put pressure on the EU and its states. While we have no direct evidence, the playbook of the current hybrid attack is clearly that of 2015 organized migration flows on Finland and Norway. So our credibility here is at stake, and we urge targeted steps to discourage Lukashenko from further escalations of the situation, and one of these steps would be designation of the state-controlled aviation company Belavia, which is already banned from using the EU airspace under the existing Belarus sanctions regime. This will effectively prevent Belavia from getting access to financial resources from EU-based financial institutions, which is currently using them, and as well as other sort of enterprises and agencies involved in this organization flow. And this is for us a good opportunity to use the present hybrid attack to develop a toolbox against hybrid threats and to increase our resilience and demonstrating through our response that EU will not submit to state hybrid attacks. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Adomainis, for your statement. And now our third and final guest speaker is somebody many of us know, the permanent representative of Poland, Andrzej Sadosz. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Chair. And we would also like to thank the members of the European Parliament for this opportunity to share with you information on current migration crisis on the borders of Poland, Latvia and Lithuania with Belarus. A lot was already said by the representatives of Latvia and Lithuania, but let me share also the Polish perspective. So we are facing right now an artificially provoked migratory crisis which may deteriorate any time. So this problem has two angles, the practical situation on the border and political third country hybrid aggression against the EU. So I will start with the first angle and a brief description of the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border. So the border between Poland and Belarus is over 400 kilometers long, and Poland has been recording an unprecedented influx of migrants from Belarus since mid-August. And just to give you a picture of the situation, please kindly show the first slide of my presentation. Between the 1st of January and end of August, there were over 3,700 attempts of irregular crossing of the border between Poland and Belarus. And now please show the second slide. So as you can see, most of the crossings took place in August, over 3,300. And due to the efforts made by Poland in order to better protect the border, a vast majority of these attempts were prevented, almost 2,400. So migrants who irregularly crossed the border and were apprehended were mainly citizens of Iraq, Afghanistan, Russia, Syria and Somalia. So now please show the next slides from 3 to 9 with several pictures from the border. So there is a group of around 30 migrants remaining since many days on the border between Belarus and Poland, near the village called Usnaż Górny. So Belarus has been facilitated regular shifts of these persons. They are provided with means of subsistence by the Belarusian authorities, and it should be underlined that they remain on the Belarusian side and did not decide to apply for international protection at the border crossing point in accordance with Polish legislation. So although Poland has prepared the transport with the humanitarian aid, the Belarusian authorities did not agree on the entry. Some migrants apprehended in Poland after irregularly crossing the border with Belarus and identification apply for the international protection later on. So in total, the number of persons applying for international protection in Poland amounted over 3,400 between the 1st of January and the end of August, and it is 100% higher than the number of applications lodged in the same period of previous year. So the majority of applicants came from Belarus and Afghanistan, and this includes Afghans seeking international protection following the evacuation from Kabul. Now I will refer to the Polish response to the situation at the EU external border with Belarus. So currently the border between Poland and Belarus is protected by the Polish border guard with the support of the army as part of Poland's and EU external border protection on the most difficult section of the border, which is 187 kilometers. Poland decided to construct a physical barrier. And furthermore, on the 31st of August, the Polish government applied to the president for the introduction of a state of emergency for 30 days on the part of the border strip between Poland and Belarus, parts of communities of the Podlaskie and Lubelskie voivodeships. So despite increased migratory pressure on the Polish-Belarusian border, Poland is currently responding to the situation within its own capacity while ensuring proper protection of the EU external border with Belarus. So our services cooperate closely with their counterparts in the neighboring member states in order to prevent secondary movements. I'm sure that my colleague from the European External Action Service will certainly focus more on this, so I will just shortly refer to the EU response to the situation at the EU external border with Belarus. It is obvious that the Lukashenko regime is testing the resilience of the European Union in terms of procedure, equipment and infrastructure. So he's aware of weaknesses of the European reception system that emerged during the migration crisis in 2015. And he therefore exploits the gaps in this system, knowing that the issue of migration in the EU is subject of our ongoing policy debates. So, to address the current situation at the EU level, Poland has been advocating for strengthening the EU response. We raised this issue at the last COREPER meetings and at the ministerial IPCR roundtable on the 18th of August and also during the extraordinary meeting of the EU Ministers of Home Affairs on the 31st of August. So we advocated for stronger language of the ministerial statement in order to more effectively respond to attempts to instrumentalize illegal migration for political purposes and other hybrid threats. So now, going smoothly to the political dimension of the current situation, there is no doubt that the migration crisis on the borders with Belarus has been planned and systematically organized by the Belarusian authorities. Instrumental use of migrants and putting them in danger in order to advance the political goals is a flagrant violation of human rights and international law, and it also qualifies as a hybrid attack against the European Union and threat to our common security and stability. So also the disinformation campaign by Belarus and Russia is part of this hybrid attack, and it's aimed to discredit our countries and efforts to protect borders and to sow division in Europe, and countries bordering Belarus face also criticism from some actors and organizations which are unilaterally considering the situation, limiting the review of it to the asylum threat. So unity and multi-dimensional support by the EU and member states are key to responding effectively to the challenge posed by Minsk, and it is our common interest to send a clear signal to the world that crossing channel via Belarus does not work. And this is not about defending ourselves against migrants, but about depriving Belarus of its instrument of destabilization. So it is important to jointly use all available diplomatic and practical means to cut the new irregular migration routes, and in this context further engagement with institutions is seeking sustainable solutions with Iraq and other countries of origin to stop artificial stimulation of migration flows is needed. And it is also important to draw the attention of international organizations, the UN, UNHCR, to the situation of irregular migrants in Belarus. Finally, there is one more context that we should be aware of the Belarusian and Russian Zapad 2021 military exercise scheduled to start on the 10th of September. Russia, breaching its own OSCE obligations for transparency, attempts to hide their scale. So thank you very much, and I do apologize for taking too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now, without further ado, Luc de Vigne, it's yours, the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, honourable members of the European Parliament. Indeed, it's been now 13 months that we've followed the deplorable repression that the Belarusian population suffers. And as a previous speaker was mentioning, the number of political prisoners has now reached the amazing number of 650, which constitutes a 25% increase in only the recent months since July. So obviously, unfortunately, the situation remains deteriorating. The latest of the activities conducted by Lukashenko regime, which is this state-run instrumentalization of migrants, is obviously a blatant disregard for international norms, and it will certainly not result in changing our resolve. And it will certainly not help lifting any sanctions against Belarus, quite the contrary, as previous speakers also mentioned. The border, obviously, of Belarus with Lithuania, Poland and Latvia is an EU border, and therefore security not only matters, but is taken extremely seriously. And I'm also happy that in our reaction, the first one was of solidarity, mobilizing the European agencies such as Frontex, such as European Asylum Office, Europol, including with a number of staff on the ground, as well as financially support Lithuania for a special emergency assistance under our Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund. A second reaction has been diplomatic activities vis-à-vis the countries of origin of these migrants, and first of all Iraq, which has shown good cooperation, and therefore the numbers have decreased. Obviously, the soon-to-come trip of High Representative Borrell to Iraq will also help continuing making sure that these numbers have decreased. But also activities vis-à-vis Turkey, vis-à-vis also African countries, and as a result, the flights between Iraq and Minsk have been stopped. But also we have worked with international partners in multilateral fora, with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, with the International Organization for Migrations. And as I've said, vis-à-vis Belarus, we will continue our sanctions policy. We will continue also to deliver our assistance to those who are in need, and particularly the independent media, the civil society in general, but also we have a strong message of solidarity, but also of hope in case there would be a democratic Belarus with a strong, comprehensive plan of economic support up to 3 billion euros. Unfortunately, this is far from being the case now, and for the time being, we continue to send very clear and very strong signals vis-à-vis Lukashenko regime that international obligations, including in this particular case when it comes to migrants, need to be respected. and this situation will continue, obviously, to monitor very closely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Lithuanian. So, these were our 4 introductory statements. Colleagues, we now have exactly 1 hour time to discuss all this. I first give the floor to Robert Biedron, who chairs the standing delegation with Belarus, and he is connected remotely. 3 minutes, Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for organizing again this very important debate on the situation connected to Belarus. And we must underline we are dealing with very cynical instrumentation of the dramatic situation of migrants, and this is clear. And we heard it from all the previous speakers. We know that since July, the surge in illegal migration from Belarus to Lithuania, Poland and Latvia has seen thousands of migrants stranded on the EU's borders, and it's a kind of instrumentalization of migrants by the Belarusian regime, and it was underlined that it's a part of hybrid measures aimed at pressing Brussels in response to its 4th set of sanctions and our clear support of democratic opposition in Belarus. But if I might have the first call, we must remain firm and shall not play the Lukashenko game, which already, in my opinion, as a head of delegation, is a case. We should say this loud and clear, that this is not only a challenge to Lithuania, Poland or Latvia, but for EU as a whole. So our solidarity is very much needed. It was said that we should work on the next set of sanctions, and I fully agree with that. It should target a substantially larger number of entities and officials responsible for human rights violations, and we should freeze any financial help. So that's why the worrying information from IMF, International Monetary Fund, on the financial resources which might go to Lukashenko should be terrifying for us. What I want to underline is the situation on the border with Poland and Belarus. There are 30 migrants stuck on the border in the limbo for 3 weeks, and with no medical help from the Polish part, even though they have access to them. And there is already a decision of the European Court of Human Rights. Needs a kind of it goes in the line with the Lukashenko game to play a game with European Union, and I think we should be very careful with using migrants as a scapegoats in our own national politics. So I very much support the idea of a toolbox dealing with the hybrid warfare, and I want to tell you that we as a delegation will organize a special debate on the situation in this context this month, and we issued with Petras Austrevicius, the standing rapporteur, a special joint statement 15th of July on this context, so I recommend also our recommendations from this statement. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Robert, for your statement, and now our standing rapporteur for Belarus, Petras Austrevicius, has the floor.
Thank you, David. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Lukashenko, as a self-installed president, one of the last political barbarians in Europe, he promised and he threatened, not once, us Europeans, to flood the European Union with migrants, smuggled products, and even nuclear waste. And he has something, and he has probably all of that in his disposition. This is a policy of revenge. Revenge against us who speak rightly so about the violation of fundamental human rights in Belarus, fight against
with brutal weapons against the opposition and own people. Now he turned to us, and he does it in an organized manner. All words, all terminology used is completely right. It's a state-organized illegal migration from routes well established, from Iraq and Turkey. It's a human trafficking, which is sponsored by the state, with the established price for each soul, around 15,000 USD. And it's, again, a state-sponsored international crime. Colleagues, it's not spontaneous, but organized. It's not originated in third countries. It is initiated in third countries and used for their bad purpose. So what comes to the Lithuanian border? Things have started in June. In July, we had around, in some days, more than 300 illegal crossings a day. And it was picking up all the time until the Parliament of Lithuania, the government took appropriate decisions. So we have to agree probably on terminology. I'm in full agreement with the irregular migration term, but now we're facing illegal migration. And we should not turn around, and to use something different. So I appreciate all the assistance we've been given from Commission, Frontex, Member States. Great, thank you for this. And some dialogue with third countries really gave results back. Iraq, no direct flights, but with still 28 flights from Turkey. 28 weekly flights from Turkey, and it didn't work. So we have to talk to Turkey much more. According to estimates, up to 10,000 of migrants are still in Belarus. And with two more phenomena on the horizon, situation in Afghanistan, with the huge potential of possible migrants and asylum seekers, legal asylum seekers from Afghanistan, we might face immense pressure. And rightly mentioned Zapad. Zapad might instrumentalize some new green people, green men, which we saw in Crimea some years ago. So that's why let's stay vigilant, let's stay concentrated, and let's work. And thank you for all assistance given to my country and my neighbors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Petras, for your statement. And now the coordinators have the floor. We begin with Michael Gahler for the EPP.
Thank you very much. I think there is broad consensus thus far. What has been said, what we need to do, so I need not repeat that. My questions go towards our preparations of the next sanctions package, especially the listing of persons. With every political prisoner, with every trial, the name of a judge is known, the name of a prosecutor is known. We know in all the detailed issues, we know the people who are involved, even sometimes with the passport numbers. So there is quite a lot of material available. So where do we stand, and what is the next decisions? When are they due to come? On the existing ones, my question, and that goes especially to Lithuania, if I am not mistaken, it was decided to include the Kali sector, oil and banking sector, but only for future engagements. So for running agreements or deliveries, it's still ongoing. My question, as a reprisal directly to Belarus, could Lithuania not consider to stop ongoing deliveries through the port of Klaipėda? I think there is, I wonder, is still Kali ongoing because of previous agreements? And if so, would that not be an effective measure to stop it? Where do we stand with the discussions on Turkey? Who is engaging in this regard? That is my question. And a last question, because of the interesting figures that we got from Poland here, I see that the largest amount of citizens that applied for protection in Poland are from Belarus. So I presume they are not transported by the regime to the border, so they come in other ways. Could you perhaps explain how that is handled? And there are also a lot of Russians. I think we cannot exclude that there are many people who are also fearing political repression in Russia or facing that. So is there a difference in handling of the refugees that arrive, in your case in Poland, with these huge figures, as I said, from Belarus and Russia? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Tonino Pizzula for the S&D, please.
Thank you, David, and thanks to our guest for the insights. Respect for international conventions on the human rights of all those seeking protection and international obligations to the most vulnerable should be unquestionable. Equally safe and legal ways to seek such protection should function, and one does not exclude the other. In the European Union, unfortunately, this is not the case. We followed an exceptional decision of the European Court of Human Rights last week. Primary living conditions and care for people stranded at the border should be ensured without delay. But we must be realistic and say that this will not solve basically political problem. These people are the latest victim of the Belarusian regime used as a tool to exert political pressure on the European Union. It's easy to conclude that the topic of migration is the one that divides us the most effectively. Member states and external borders cannot be left alone dealing with this migratory and political pressure. We should stop accusing each other and work together to finally reach an agreement on the Pact on Migration and Asylum. So my first question is, what is your assessment? What are chances for political agreement on the Pact of Migration and Asylum in the near future, and if at all in this form? More, a scheme for voluntary settlement of Afghan nationals in the EU was to be discussed at the same meeting, yet nothing is mentioned in the statement. Any information to share on this? European Union Interior Minister stated on Tuesday that the EU will respond to attempts to, I'm quoting, instrumentalize illegal migration for political purposes and other hybrid threats, end of the quote. What kind of the response is planned, through which concrete actions? And lastly, the situation in Belarus does not move in desired direction of political change. Are there any new sanctions or other political actions against the Lukashenko regime planned? Thank you.
Thank you, Tonino. For Renew, I give the floor to Dragos, to the Rat.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thanks to our guests. I think the fact that we are witnessing a cynical tactic conceived and deployed by two cynical dictators, let's not forget that there are two, Lukashenko and Putin, behind him, I think that's already a matter of evidence. The question is, what do we do about it? I think when it comes internally to us as member states, and my colleague Petras has already said it, it is a matter of solidarity and cohesion amongst ourselves, but what goes around comes around. Solidarity at the Belarusian border should also mean solidarity in the Aegean, should also mean solidarity in the Mediterranean. So we are going to face a test. Again, I agree with my colleague Petras, very soon, the Afghan test. So let's make sure that we are now politically preparing a proper, cohesive response to the challenge that will come again at our borders. And it will also very likely come also at the Belarusian border again, with Poland, Lithuania or Latvia. We are going to see Afghans there soon as well, just as we are going to see them in Bulgaria, in Greece, and again, we need a cohesive response. Externally, when it comes to the reaction and response to the Lukashenko regime, I won't repeat what my colleague said. We cannot blink. On the contrary, we need tougher sanctions, we need better targeted sanctions, we need to sanction those that actually matter. And as my colleague also said, we know who they are by name, so let's not be shy about better targeting our sanctions. And last but not least, we should not for a second forget and diminish our resolve to support the civil society and those fighting against the Lukashenko regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Dragos. Viola von Kramon-Taubadel for the Greens.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all the colleagues also from Lithuania and Latvia, and full solidarity, of course, with all the three countries who are the main targets of this hybrid measures, warfare, however you want to call it. There's no question this is an orchestrated revanche, and we have seen it for the last couple of weeks. It is obvious, and the numbers you have shown to us and your colleague from Lithuania and Latvia also have approached to us the same things. That is a real shame. And it's up to us to build up resilience and to show strength against Lukashenko's brutal regime. Why should he be more polite to people or citizens from Afghanistan or to Iraq when he is not to his own people? So that is obvious that his way of handling that and inviting people, organizing these flights from Iraq, and therefore it is very helpful that we keep close ties to the new Iraq government and to really find ways of mediation, working together with our international partners to, find human opportunities, how to interfere in a very moderate and human way to stop that. Nevertheless, I have some questions. First of all, why the IMF has disbursed the tranche, the COVID aid. Why is that necessary? Why is that not conditionalized? For the last weeks, there were many people, especially from the civil society, asking us, how could that happen? Why is that necessary to support financially this regime at that point? Second of all, of course, the question of Frontex in that respect might be questionable, but especially we got some questions from civil society in Poland, and maybe the Polish colleague could answer. You have given already some of the answers, but it was said that there's 32 migrants have been camped out between two lines of border guards on the eastern side, Belarusians on the western side, Poles. They are given no medical care. That's what's said from the NGO side. The Polish government, however, argues they're currently on the Belarusian territory, meaning they should apply for asylum in that country, but it was seen differently. So it refuses to register any asylum claims from individuals in the group or provide them with any assistance. And of course, human rights groups criticized the Polish government for this. Maybe you could also add a little bit on this. But in general, I think we should also, your ambassador, Lithuanian, Latvian ambassador was expelled. Our ambassador was expelled. Nobody speaks about that anymore. Even this, we should keep up these words and really find a diplomatic and a financial sanction common approach how to deal with this Lukashenko regime. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jack Madison for the ID Group.
Thanks a lot. As I understood just now that we have interpretation also to Estonian, so I will speak in my own language to give them also work. Esiteks, see, mis toimub Leedu ja Poola piiril, on umbes, kui öelda, copy-paste aastast 2015-16. Õnneks viimastel kuudel räägitakse, et tegemist on illegaalse immigratsiooniga. See ei ole seaduslik. Isikutel, kes põgenevad mingist X riigist, on võimalik taotleda rahvusvahelist kaitset ka nendes riikides, mida nad läbivad. Rahvusvahelise õiguse kohaselt isegi Valgevene, kuigi seal on Lukashenko režiim, isegi Valgevene on ohutu riik võrreldes näiteks tänase Afganistaniga või Süüriaga 10 aastat tagasi. Aastal 2015-16, kui algas massiivne illegaalse immigratsiooni laine, siis tol ajal põhimõtteliselt välditi sõna illegaalne immigratsioon ja täiesti tahtlikult kasutati valesid termineid, et kõik inimesed on pagulased, see on legaalne, me peaksime kõik vastu võtma. Kuigi nad tulid Liibüa kaudu, mis oli ohutu riik tol hetkel võrreldes Süüriaga. Seega mul on väga hea meel, et me oleme muutunud korrektseks terminites ja väljendites. Teiseks, 25. augustil vastas mulle ja teistele parlamendiliikmetele Ylva Johansson Euroopa Komisjoni nimel. Meie küsimus puudutas Hispaanias toimuvat, näiteks Ceuta ja Melilla piiritarade ehitamist. Küsimus oli see, et kas Euroopa Liidu rahalistest vahendist võib kasutada piiritarade ehitamiseks. Proua Johansoni vastus 25. augustil ütles, et kuigi tarade kasutamine ei ole Schengeni piiri eeskirjades sõnaselgelt välistatud, on komisjon seisukohal, et tarad ei ole kõige tõhusam vahend piirihalduse parandamiseks ning ei toeta seetõttu Euroopa Liidu vahendite kasutamist sellel otstarbel. Siin tekib küsimus, et kas meie eesmärk Euroopa Liidus tervikuna on immigratsiooni haldamine või illegaalse immigratsiooni peatamine. See on kaks väga olulist erinevat eesmärki. Ehk siis, kui me soovime peatada illegaalset immigratsiooni, siis kõige tõhusam vahend on tara või müür. Kõige tõhusam vahend ei ole näotuvastus või sõrmejälgede kogumine. Kui me tahame lihtsalt hallata, siis jah, tuvastame illegaalsed immigrandid, võtame nad vastu ja hakkame ümber jagama. Seetõttu, mis on ka kõikide külas seisukoht, ehk siis kas Euroopa Liit peaks tähelepanu pöörama füüsiliste tõkete ehitamisele Euroopa Liidu välispiiridel, et juba ennetada võimalikke järgmisi illegaalse immigratsiooni laineid. Suur aitäh!
Thank you. Anna Fotyga, ECR.
Thank you, Chair. I fully endorse statements presented by Poland, Lithuania and Latvia, and also statement by our rapporteur, Petras Auštrevičius. The situation is extremely dangerous and extremely delicate. Allow me, I was probably one of the first MEPs speaking loudly in plenary chamber about Lithuanian crisis. I considered it extremely dangerous. I reiterate this. Moreover, we are close to Sept exercises conducted jointly and prepared jointly by Belarusian and Russian general staff. According to publications, official publications already, they are to be maintained near our borders, in particular Polish border, actually immediate vicinity of the frontier, and scenario foreseeing a border incident. Therefore, statements of 4 prime ministers of the region, including Polish one, therefore concern of NATO, and therefore we have to put aside naivety of this issue, because provocations are very possible in this incidental cases as well, proliferating to enormous scale possibly, including limited nuclear strike. That is provided in scenarios of those exercises. And this one is quite special one. Already echelons of Russian troops coming to vicinity of Polish borders. What are we speaking about now? Can we talk to UN, HRC, and ask them to investigate rather than following the statements by Belarus, to investigate the hybrid tools used by Lukashenko, dictator, simply to exert pressure on the European Union? Can we ask Belarusian Red Cross to go to prisons and to investigate the fate of political prisoners like Andrzej Poczobut, Angelika Boris, and many, hundreds others, instead of engaging in artificial crisis used for the purpose of upcoming, in 1 week time, upcoming vast, huge and extremely dangerous exercises. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Fotiga, I would suggest that I also give the floor to the remaining 6 colleagues who would like to take the floor according to the Hunt system, and then we would have enough time to conclude with our guest speakers. Sandra Kalniete is the first.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, as many have already said it, the situation on the EU external border with Belarus is rapidly escalating and requires our urgent attention and rapid engagement. The Lukashenko regime is exploiting a well-documented Russian playbook of hybrid instruments, in the case artificial irregular migration, to overwhelm the asylum systems of Eastern EU member states, stoke political tension, which is really present, and undermine the EU's ability to react to other crises. The way the Lukashenko regime has used people fleeing conflict as human ammo is a stark reminder of its disregard for the most basic fundamental human rights and of its complete disregard for international law. We must take urgent practical steps to strengthen and reinforce our eastern border, allocating the necessary human and technological resources. We must also waste no time in bolstering our strategic communication capabilities. To counter the Lukashenko's informal attacks, the regime is actively attempting to discredit Latvia, Lithuania and Poland and sow divisions in the EU. And to conclude, I want to join those who are warning because of Zapad exercises close to our borders. It is not, we must be conscious that it is not excluded that Green Man operation could be launched to test EU preparedness to stop them. So let's be vigilant. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Next, Juozas Olekas, please.
Thank you, David. Dear colleagues, once again we are discussing the situation at the external EU border with Belarus. Our distinguished speakers very precisely described the situation there. Now it is even more clear that a recent migration surge from Belarus is well-orchestrated hybrid attack by Lukashenko against the EU. This is the most brutal and cynical act by Belarusian regime, where they are playing with the lives of hundreds and thousands of innocent people. The EU should be united behind the position of Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, who are defending a border of whole European Union. We should make it clear for all possible asylum seekers, please use the official crossing points, embassies, consulates, please file your request there. But those who came illegally with the help of Belarusian state-sponsoring criminal system does not have a future in the EU. Only then so-called 3 days visa-free Belarusian holidays will lose its appeal for the possible migrants. The EU also should do its homework in updating its asylum policy to the current realities. We need the means how to prevent the use of illegal migration as hybrid attack tool by the regime outside the EU. If you look at the Lithuanian statistic from the beginning of the year till 21st of August, Lithuania requested more than 400 illegal migrants. 71% of them are men, vast majority, 2,800 from Iraq. It is safe to say that majority of them are not refugees from the war zones, but economical migrants. I would like also to thank state members and Frontex and Commission that very timely answered to the help request from Lithuania and provide with many very needed supplies for migrants, human know-how, such interpreters and additional border control means. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Josas. Next is Andrzej Nitsky, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a discussion about our security, very important for citizens of my country, so I will use my mother tongue to emphasize several points. Po pierwsze, jest oczywistością, że granica zewnętrzna Unii Europejskiej musi być skutecznie chroniona i myślę, że tu mamy konsensus i ponad politycznymi podziałami musimy mówić to głośno i wyraźnie, także apelując o codzienną koordynację działań rządów polskiego, litewskiego, łotewskiego z instytucjami europejskimi, z agencjami europejskimi, bo taki jest wymóg tej chwili. Ta codzienna koordynacja jest niezbędna. Ale my kolejny raz rozmawiamy i mówimy o reakcjach wobec reżimu Łukaszenki, gdzie, tak jak powiedział Petras Austrevicius, zorganizowany szmugiel ludzi przez Łukaszenkę jest kolejną jego zbrodnią na liście przestępstw, które od roku obserwujemy i omawiamy. I nie byłoby tych kolejnych zbrodni, gdybyśmy reagowali jako wspólnota szybciej, mocniej i bardziej zdecydowanie. Mówię o tym dlatego, że przed rokiem mówiliśmy o ukradzionych wyborach, później terror wobec obywateli białoruskich, porwany samolot, przypominam, lecący do jednej ze stolic naszych państw. Dzisiaj mamy zorganizowany mafijny proceder z opłatami za ten szmugiel przez granicę, naszą zewnętrzną granicę. Czas najwyższy, oprócz sankcji, oprócz mocnych politycznych stanowisk, na działania o charakterze prawnym. Aleksander Łukaszenka powinien stanąć przed Międzynarodowym Trybunałem Sprawiedliwości w Hadze. Mamy na to możliwe działania prawne i powinniśmy to wykorzystać. Nie można pozwolić na to, by ten terrorysta, bo tak to trzeba w tej chwili nazwać, dalej szantażował wspólnotę europejską kolejnymi zagrożeniami. Dziękuję.
Thank you, Andrzej, for your statement. Isabel Santos. Is she connected? Isabel, we can see you, but we can't hear you. In the meantime, I'll go to the next speaker. Perhaps we can connect again. Andreas Kavilius.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues. I will not repeat what have been said. Really, in Lithuania, we know, what does it mean. We know, and we share all the critical words about Lukashenko regime. We agree that this is really a hybrid war, and especially before Zapad exercise, it makes life even more challenging. But I would like to turn your attention to what Petras Austrevicius have said, about 10,000 illegal migrants, which now are in Belarus, at least what our data are saying. So luckily with EU support, all three countries which were attacked by hybrid war of Lukashenko, we managed to stop, more or less to stop, flows of those illegal migrants into our countries, into EU. But 10,000, are in Belarus, and they are becoming arrested by, Lukashenko's stupidity, I would say. And we can imagine that those numbers will increase, till we shall build, our fences on the border. And the question is that those people really will face a humanitarian catastrophe. And that is what we need to speak out, very loudly. That Lukashenko, besides, being a criminal with persecution of, political opposition in Belarus, he is becoming criminal in humanitarian, area, and that is, what we need to have in mind. I'm not saying that we need to take those people, into our countries, but we need to raise that question. 10 or 20,000, people during the winter time in Belarus, that will be a humanitarian catastrophe. We know what does it mean, to find a place in Lithuania for 4,000, migrants, preparing them, for winter time. And we can imagine that Lukashenko is not paying any attention to how those people will live, in Belarus during the winter time. So that's what I would like to, point out when we're talking about that situation.
Thank you, Andrios. Witold Waszczykowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, David, for responding in a short notice for our request to organize this meeting to discuss the lessons learned from the border incidents. The first, there is no doubt that it is a pre-planned hybrid action against the European Union, a revenge for sanctions being imposed on Belarus. Secondly, this action is well organized. We already mentioned flights from Iraq, Turkey, Russia. People pay money, a lot of money for plane tickets, visas, hotels, transport to the border. We know that about 10,000 of them are waiting to be taken through Poland to Germany, Sweden and other countries. They are no refugees. They are also partially responsible for this action. They are there on a rotation basis. They have a full support from Belarus. They have a medical support, and the Polish convoy is, of course, waiting on the checkpoint to deliver additional support. So please do not rely on the fake news spread by the Polish opposition about this. This action cannot be planned and implemented without the consent of Russia. Third, there is a correlation with Afghan crisis, the military exercise Zapad 2021, which is near Grodno, and I fully agree with Madam Fotyga, who mentioned that there is a danger of provocation because Grodno is populated by Poles. Fourth, Polish response, emergency status is a very legitimate response. Fifth, we appeal for plenary debate and resolution which is supposed to condemn Lukashenko and appeal for more sanctions against the regime. And sixth, accepting Afghans refugees if they show at the borders is not the solution. They have not learned any European values for 20 years in Afghanistan. They will not absorb our values if they are imported to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, should we give Isabel Santos another try? Isabel, we can see you, but we can't hear you.
Are you listening?
Yes, now.
Now? Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Mr. President. For a long time that Mr. Lukashenko became a very non-classical member of our international political community. It became a criminal, clearly a criminal, and now a migrant smuggler. I think that we must use all our tools to combat this situation, and I only see one solution. It's to have a dialogue with other international institutions like OSCE, NATO, UN, and face all our law tools to combat him and raise an accusation by smuggling against Mr. Lukashenko, because he is the mind behind this hybrid threat that we are facing in our borders. And we cannot tolerate this, because it's not the first time that dictators are using human beings in despair, migrants, as weapons. I remember what the president of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, done, and what it was done by Morocco. It's not something very new, and it's something that is becoming a new normal. Dictators using people as weapons. And in accordance with our values, we have the obligation to combat this. I think that this is the moment to raise in a very organized and very cooperative way different kinds of sanctions that are different international organizations have in their hands and they can use against Mr. Lukashenko. It's time to go ahead and it's time to present him in a trial in Hague. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the final speaker is Bronis Ropė from the Green Group.
Labą dieną visiems. Ačiū gerbiamas pirmininkė. Tai iš tikrųjų gyvenu visiškai šalia Baltarusijos sienos, apie 20 km. Ir po vieną kitą migrantą kasmet būdavo. Bet kada dabar padidėjo šimtais, tai iš tikrųjų kelia ypatingą nerimą ir tai labai ypatingai svarbu ir vietos gyventojams. Vietos gyventojai yra pasimetę, įsigandę ir labai baiminasi dėl savo ateities. Tai vienas dalykas. Antras dalykas, akivaizdu, kad Lukašenka hibridinius veiksmus prieš Europą vykdo suderinę su Putinu. Tai mes turim tą žinoti ir turim tą jaust ir dėl to turim taikyti priemonės. Aišku, labai džiugu, kad visi kalbėtojai, visos šalis supranta šitą situaciją ir traktuoja šitą situaciją vienodai, bet turim ne tik tai kalbėti, bet pradėti ir realius veiksmus, kad Lukašenka pamatytų, kad tai yra nusikaltimas ir tai jam atves į aklavietę. Tai tikrai norėtųsi griežtesnės ir greitesnės operatyvinės pozicijos. Na ir iš kitos pusės norėtųsi, kad Europos komisijos atsakingi pareigūnai greičiau konsultuotų valstybės narės. Pavyzdžiui, Lietuva 1,5 savaitės buvo pasimetusi Lietuvos valdžia ir bandė visokius dalykus ir kiršino visuomenę. Todėl ta patirtis, kuri yra Europoje, jinai turi būti operatyvai perkelta ir mes turim kalbėti lygiagrečiai apie migracijos tvarkos tikslinimą ir tobulinimą, kad ateityje tokių dalykų nebūtų. Ačiū.
Thank you, colleague Ropė. So, we have heard many colleagues from the different groups, and now I give the floor back to our guest speakers to comment on what they have heard, to answer questions. We will once again start with Ms. Kalninia Lukashevitsa. So I'm calling Riga. Please keep it to 5 minutes.
Thank you. And once again, thank you for this opportunity to share our perspective on the situation. And I think this meeting is a clear sign that we stand united and we stand strong against the Lukashenko regime and the hybrid attacks of the regime. During my intervention, I suggested 4 further actions of the European Union. And I was pleased to see quite broad support for them. Concerning the further sanctions, Mr. Pikula asked whether they are planned, and also Mr. Galler asked about the possibility to prepare concrete sanctions. And let me say that I really believe that in response on these ongoing hybrid attacks by Belarus on the European Union, we must adapt and expand. We must adapt new sanctions and also expand existing sanctions. And for example, the company Belarusian and other Belarus state companies and agencies who are enabling or directly benefiting from the flow of third country nationals to EU borders must be sanctioned. So this could include also state tourism agencies, state hotels, and Belarus state border guards. And I think that discussion on sectoral sanctions also must be resumed on sanctions clause coordination and then close coordination with our partners on sanctions is essential. I thank you very much also about the support to the idea of toolbox dealing with hybrid attacks, and especially Mr. Bedron mentioned that. I think it's very important to be able to face this crisis and also the next possible activities and actions of this regime and other regimes. And Madame Kalniete mentioned also the enormous attack of disinformation campaign that is directed against the European Union by Lukashenko regime. And indeed, it aims to create a crisis inside the European Union and to diminish our unity. But once again, I think that this meeting clearly demonstrates that he will not reach his goal. We are able to see the reality, and we are able to stay united and give also clear messages that we will not allow to diminish the European unity, and we see the reality what it is. So I think that we will be able to face this crisis together. Thank you for the support, and thank you also to the European Parliament for the long-standing clear position that we need to support the civil society of the Belarus, and that the only way forward is democracy and fair elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Parliamentary Secretary. And now, Mantas Adomėnas. I am calling Lithuania.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, honourable members of the European Parliament, for your expressions of support. And I want to, in addressing the points you raised, I want to make three sort of points. First is sanctions do work. We see increasingly sort of desperate actions by the regime, but we also know that the regime is hard pressed by already existing incomplete sanctions on potassium. So in fact, what we need is to continue and ratchet up the pressure. When it comes to Belkali sanctions and the potassium, the current European Council reglement doesn't permit the discontinuation of the pre-existing contracts, which is, I think, the omission in the implementation of the sanctions regime, and should be addressed in the next round of sanctions. But as you well know, Lithuania and other member states cannot unilaterally apply economic sanctions in dealing. So solidarity is needed, but certainly sort of the way to move forward is to increase sanctions regime. The political challenge that will come is not that Lukashenko can withstand the sanctions, and I might mention in passing that, yes, the decision by IMF to disburse the tranche of assistance is truly regrettable, and if it can be resisted, it should be resisted by all means. But the challenge which is facing us is that Lukashenko's weakness may tempt Russia to attempt a takeover of Belarus, of its industries, and ultimately of the state. And that's, I think, the EU should formulate its political response very clearly, that no cessions of Belarusian sovereignty are legitimate by the dictator who has stolen an election a year ago. But sanctions do work, and we should move along that way with the new sanctions package, as well as perhaps a sort of amended conditions which would allow the inclusion of all the organizers and inciters of illegal migration flows. When it comes to irregular or illegal migration migrants and migration flows, nominos and odiosa, both work. I think it's very important to separate two realities. One is the reality of hybrid attack, which is performed by Belarusian state against the EU member states and EU in general, and another is the reality of migrants themselves, who may have become unwitting instruments, but also are victims, and clearly that their sort of rights have to be vouchsafed and not to be conflated with the criminal actions that the Belarusian regime is doing, is making in order to step back. So Lithuania is devoting a lot of attempt to separate the genuine asylum seekers from economic migrants, and just as a background detail, even before the migration instigated migration crisis started, Lithuania issued 2,300 humanitarian visas to Belarusian activists, journalists, and students who have been kicked out of universities, allowing them to settle in Lithuania and to escape the regime. So it's not the refugees which are a problem, it's the Belarusian state-instigated hybrid attack. And this, I think, should be kept very, very clearly in focus. And the third point is that this hybrid attack is not by any means some throwback from the past. It's a sign of the things and times to come. And the globalized world permits many more instances whereby civil institutions can be used, as well as processes can be used to increase political pressure. Migration can be weaponized, civil aviation institutions can be weaponized to hijack planes bearing dissidents, information flows can be weaponized. So, in fact, the question is not a toolbox, and in general, what is the EU reaction, what is the response going to be strategically to such possibilities? And the instruments and tools that the EU already has for that need to be upgraded in order to take into account future contingencies. And if we take a toolbox or a new regime of response out of this crisis, that will be one in which the EU has become more resilient and stronger through this crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Adominas. And now our permanent representative, Andrzej Zadosz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. With your permission, first I will try to very briefly summarize, let's say, the elements of the discussion, and then in the second part I will answer the question raised by the distinguished members of the European Parliament, namely by Mr. Michael Galler and Madame Viola from Kramon Taubadel. So first, Belarus is waging a hybrid operation against us, against the EU, which first objects are neighboring EU member states. It ruthlessly utilizes migrants by luring them to Minsk and later on providing them to the borders with the EU. And while trying to help and alleviate suffering of migrants, we must remain firm with Belarus authorities. And we appreciate the European community's understanding and solidarity with Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and we expect further common efforts to counteract the destabilization attempts at the EU external border. So we need a unified approach and decisive reaction to Minsk action is important not only in the context of Belarus but also in view of other third countries which may be encouraged by Belarus to try putting pressure on the EU using migrants. And again, we would like to underline that we are ready to provide all necessary protection to persons who enter our country in compliance with our international obligations, refugee law, but at the same time we have to take necessary actions to prevent any further illegal migration and to secure EU external borders. So security element and Belarus' desire to destabilize the situation on the border with the EU are of fundamental importance, especially that in some member states we are also looking forward to the elections. Coming back to the questions, Mr. Michael Galler raised the question of statistics and the applications from Belarus and Russia. So from Belarus, we are mainly dealing with the victims of political repressions of the Belarusian regime. Citizens of Russia, those are mainly the victims of political repressions in Chechnya. The question about the application and recognition of international protection in Poland, in Germany, in all the other member states, we have let's say, the legal background for this. We have the UN Geneva Convention on the protection on the status of refugees. We have the directive of the European Parliament on the question of qualification of as beneficiaries of international protection and the status of refugee. We have also the national regulations, and people in need can apply for the international protection. They can do it at the regular crossing at the border, not at the fence, but at the regular crossing, or they can do it, let's say, internally in the Office for Foreigners in the case of Poland. So this is, we have, let's say, the regulation for this. And the question concerning the group of 30 irregular migrants, once again, just to underline, they are rotating on the daily basis. The Belarusian authorities are, let's say, delivering new and bringing back the members of this group. They are on the Belarusian side of the border. We want Polish authorities. We want to help them. We have offered let's say, humanitarian support for them, but for this we need the permission of Belarusian authorities. The Belarusian authorities didn't granted us the access to the group, which is on the territory of Belarus. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador. And to conclude, Luc de Vigny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, honourable members, for the comments and the questions. Let me just make 3 points. First of all, obviously we will continue fighting against this terrible instrumentalization of migrants and human misery by the Lukashenko regime. Fighting against that obviously will also include sanctions and work on the fifth package is starting now with the member states, and obviously, as some have mentioned, monitoring courts and judges and prosecutors who are aiding the repression of the poor Belarusian population is a key factor. I also would like to say, in reply to the questions of Mrs. von Kramon, that yes, the IMF COVID-labelled support is unfortunate. Unfortunately, the EU is not the only voter in IMF. It remains to be seen also how the European banks will implement this decision and exchange special drawing rights into hard currency. In our view, and we've made that clear to the ECB, that would be illegal because it would undermine legal sanctions regime. Secondly, we will continue our diplomatic work as well with the countries of origin for these illegal migrations. Also continue reminding the Belarusian authorities of their international obligations, even if we have no illusion on the respect of these obligations. I heard what was said about Turkish flights. It is a delicate situation also because even opposition, of course, would tell you that Belarusian citizens who need to leave the country also need airlines, but this is certainly something to be examined. And thirdly and last point, obviously we will continue keeping high the Belarusian situation on the EU political agenda, monitor the human rights situation, the situation at the border, and that includes also the coming Zapad exercise. In this context, Mr. Chairman, it's extremely important, of course, that the European Parliament continues to play an essential role and also give space to and visibility to Belarusian independent voices and to support them as we continue to do. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to say a word of thank you to the representatives of Latvia, Lithuania and Poland who participated in this meeting. I think this was very informative. I'd also like to thank Mr. De Vigne for his participation and for his valuable insights. Since we're running late, I will be very brief in trying to sum up what we have discussed in the last 90 minutes. I think the most important thing is that we need to maintain our unity while dealing with the Lukashenko regime in Belarus, and that the European Union must give a strong and coordinated response against these hybrid measures that clearly aim to destabilize the countries we have invited today. Our committee will continue to follow the situation in Belarus and on its border with the EU very closely. This is not only a matter for Lithuania, Latvia and Poland, it is a matter for all 27 member states, and solidarity is something which is very important in our family of nations. So, thank you so much. Thanks for your good contributions, and I am very happy now to hand over to Juliana Zovko, who will chair the next item, Ethiopia.